Hi, this is not the correct intro because I filmed the correct intro and my editing software hates me and won't let me use it. This is the March edition of my Buzzword reading challenge that Kayla from Books and Lala has put together. It is a really relaxed readathon where there is just one prompt a month for the year and you just have to read one book that fulfills that prompt each month. This is the list of prompts for the year. The way that I am going to interpret this readathon is I'm going to use it to try and read books that I wouldn't normally pick up. So for each word as a prompt, I am going to go to my local library and I'm going to find a book that fits that prompt. Doesn't matter what the genre is, doesn't matter what age group it's for. I am going to pick it up and I'm going to try and read it and I'm going to see if I find any books that I like. The prompt for this month was to have a character name in the book title. I didn't film at the library this time just because it's a very small library. It's starting to feel a bit weird me filming in there every month. The shelves don't change. There are like 3 shelves of books. This was actually quite an easy prompt to find. I had to pick and choose which book I felt was one I was most likely to enjoy. Some notable books that I didn't pick up were Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and then you've got your obvious ones like Circe, Harry Potter. Like there are so many books with character names in the title, so I was spoilt for choice this time. In hindsight, because I'm filming this after the fact now, I've read the book, I know how I felt about it. This would have been a really good opportunity for me to have a look at the middle grade shelves because so many middle grade series have character names in the title, but I didn't. And we ended up with Mrs. Death, and then, spoiler alert, I finished it in one sitting and I vlogged it. So here are my thoughts on Mrs. Death.
Beneath the starlit sky, our love's secret line, like leaves we soar so high. Beneath the moonlight, soft touch your hand in mine gets me every time. Lost in the city.
The greatest trick man played was making you believe I was a man. They erased me and made you all believe that death was male in spirit, the grim reaper in a black hood with a scythe. Remarkable that nobody questioned it, really, don't you think? For surely only she who bears it, she who gave you life, can be she who has the power to take it. The one is she. And only she who is invisible can do the work of death. And there is no human more invisible, more readily talked over, ignored, betrayed, and easy to walk past than a woman. Than a poor, old, black woman. A homeless black beggar woman with knotty, natty hair, broken back, walking ever so slow, pushing a shopping trolley full of plastic bottles. I can tell already that I'm going to enjoy this book. You can tell it's written by a poet, like that's unmistakable. And I'm literally only 8 pages in, and I feel like this is going to hit me like a ton of bricks. You know that kind of book where just from page 1 I can already feel the power of this book. I'm not a quote person, but that paragraph I just read out, like that's the sort of shit that you need to start a book with. Like I can't think of a better way to start this book. I have high hopes for this.
Summer's fading, there's nothing to do but bask in the glory of the winter sun. Maybe this is the season of love. As the leaves change color.
This is a very thoughtful book. It's very philosophical. I can tell already we're talking about a story within a story, and it's quite poignant. It's making references to tragedies, like real life tragedies. There's been at least one Grenfell reference already. This is set in London. It's just told in such an interesting way. There's lots of short paragraphs that ask a lot of questions that sort of follow one thread of thought, stringing them all together. But it breaks it up and kind of punctuates it with these little poems or these little like breakaways from regular prose that you would expect in a novel. This is by no means like an urban fantasy novel, for example. This is not a story of death in her world that you might expect. This feels like, I think speculative fiction is the word I'm looking for, but it's also told in an interesting format. I mean, just here is a 2-page list of all the ways you might have died in your own life, which is anxiety inducing, frankly, but I'm going to read every single one on that list, and I'm interested. It's a really different way of reading a book, but it's doing a really good job of engaging me. The writing's beautiful, like this lady is a fantastic poet, and you can tell just from the language that she's using. I feel like I'm getting sucked in a good way. Okay, I'm 100 pages in now, and we have morphed from sort of poignant views of death and quite thoughtful, provoking prose to the inner monologue / stream of consciousness of really quite a mentally unwell man who is broke, intoxicated, not living in a great situation, not looking after himself, struggling through life, struggling through poverty. It is heavily implied that he lost his family when he was very young in the Grenfell fire, which is when he first saw Mrs. Death, and he is writing a story, a book about Mrs. Death. But it's getting weird. We've had a chapter where he's writing from his own point of view if he was a piano. We've had a chapter where it's just his dream written as a poem, but instead of each line being on a new line, there's a slash in between it and there's no paragraph breaks. Everything is really metaphorical. Everything is like it's dripping with meaning and metaphor. Like the nightmare chapter was difficult to read because of the content, but it was also difficult to read because of the slashes between every word. The piano chapter is the sort of thing you might expect a mentally unwell man or an incredibly drunk man, it's not really clear, to dream or to hallucinate in the circumstances that he's just been in. It's a really odd book. We have met Mrs. Death. She's very much a secondary character, and at the moment my theory is that she is the embodiment of his trauma. She's like the person, this imaginary person that he's created and he's convinced that he saw and potentially saved him from the Grenfell fire. But she's this imaginary person that he's clinging to in order to survive mentally, if that makes sense. There are still some thought-provoking bits. We're touching on a lot of famous deaths, famous ways to die, famous massacres. Things like we've touched on 9/11, we've touched on Harambe, we've touched on migrants dying on their way to other countries, we've talked about domestic violence, we've talked about Jack the Ripper. Like, this book isn't pulling any punches. When it wants to talk about a topic, it's going to talk about a topic. But they are so varied. It feels very much like you're in Wolf, this man's mind, while he is under the influence of drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, or just trauma, bless him. It is not quite the book I thought it was going to be when I first started reading it. I'm not angry at that yet. I'm just a little, maybe unseated is the right word. It's not what I expected, but I don't think I've formed enough of an opinion yet. I do feel like I can read this all in one go. So I'm probably going to do that now.
Beneath an endless night, the world spins around. You're there, ease my mind. Like stars that never die, you and I will shine during the darkest times. As the leaves change color, I dive into you. When summer's fading, there's nothing to do but bask in the glory of the winters.
I finished it. This book has a lot to say. This book is quite intense. This book is not necessarily an easy read, but it is quite a quick read. I stand by what I said earlier about it being a bit of a fever dream while still making some really important points, particularly about the state of the world today, particularly about specific murder cases, specific people in history, for good or for worse. This was nothing like I thought it was going to be. This is a story of grief and trauma and healing and the very visceral way that people feel when they go through those things. It's intense. I did enjoy this book. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a 5-star book for me, but it's definitely made an impact. It's definitely made me think. It's definitely surprising to me. And I think if this was written by anyone other than a poet, it wouldn't work. I'm not going to spoil anything else because I think it does some really interesting and important things. I will say, don't make assumptions, because you will be laughed at that this is a really good book. I can understand why people love it so much. I can understand why there's a whole blurb full of very lovely things that people have had to say about this book. And I understand why she's award-winning and celebrated in the way that she is. Yeah, I think this is another win for this reading project, and I think it is now time for me to go to sleep and maybe consume something a little bit lighter before I do. See you next Sunday.
Maybe this is the season of love.